Oh, hi everybody, and welcome to this session. I'm so excited for this one. I'm excited for all of them, to be fair. Welcome to Claire Beckett McEnroy, and this is going to be such a fantastic session. Claire is going to be unleashing her inner, actually her outer, her everything creativity for this session, talking about fairy tales and fairy storytelling. And I'm already excited. So we get to unleash our own inner Cinderellas, I think, with this session. Really excited to have Claire. Claire is such an accomplished coach, supervisor, has taught in many countries, in many different spheres, and we're just really, really excited to have her insight here today. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand you straight over to Claire.
Thank you, EMCC. Thank you, Nicola. Always nice to see faces I know when we pop into these sessions. And we're going to get straight into it. So what I'm sharing is a link in the chat in a second that you can then click and join a Miro board. If technology is not your thing, don't worry at all, because I'm going to show the Miro board via the sort of slide share. And so it means that you can still join in 100%. If you click the Miro board, you can actually put stickies there yourself and so forth. Now, I'll keep this board so you can use it after the session as well. So in terms of the content, then you've got the slides in future. It also means if you have a reflection after the session, you can even place that there to keep the sort of thinking and reflections alive. And the other thing with that is remember that anyone who's got that link can see it. So I will only share this link with you and the people on this call. We won't be sharing the link afterwards. I'll only share the PowerPoint slides with the MCC to share with other people who watch the session later. Okay, so that was quite a preamble. Let's get on with it. So the link's there. You shouldn't need any password at all. You can just click, and I will click as well. And give me a thumbs up. Always nice to get some feedback. Is it working? Yay, technology is working for us. So I'm in Qatar this evening, and I do need to share, the excitement of the World Cup. Lots more people here. And I've noticed just the last few days, now and again, there's that Dalek-y sort of sound. And I think it's maybe the telecom companies getting used to the influx of so many more people. So do take yourself off mute and speak out if you didn't hear anything and you want me to repeat it. So we're here this evening. For me, it might be morning or noon for you, to talk about fairy tales for deepening understanding and reflection. And anything we do here is suitable for one-on-one, self-reflection, working with groups, and also with teams for coaching, mentoring, and of course, supervision, which is so much about reflection. So I'm going to bring you all to me on the board, just so we're all in the same place. And here we go. So in terms of contracting, I invite you to be as creative as you wish to be. When the sort of flyer went out, it said, bring Lego, bring clay, bring your pastel colours, grab some paper or a pen, or draw with your magic glitter painting finger in the air if you wish. And I know some of you, I can see your resources there already. And the first thing we're going to do is look at the focus for today. Of course, there are so many fairy tales. We're going to be looking at Cinderella. So the first thing I invite you to do is write down 5 or 6 little pointers for you as a reminder of the story of Cinderella. So I'll just give you a few minutes to do that. And you don't have to write it on paper. You can write it, like I said, in the air, or, if reflection's staring out the window or closing your eyes. Whatever works for you is the right thing to do. And if you wish to use the mirror board, over here there's a little arrow, and you can go to a sticky note and place that sticky note, and then you can put your pointers that you remember, the main bits of the story as it flows. You can do it that way if you wish. Now, I do need to share some of these slides on the Miro. I haven't made them all sort of permanent, locked them. So if you do happen to move them about, don't move them too far. There are a number of different related actual stories for Cinderella. Some of them are more gruesome, like the Brothers Grimm. I think that's why they're called the Brothers Grimm. And then there's elements from China, where as opposed to singing with the birds and talking to the birds, it's goldfish. So many different, it's which one were you brought up with, or was it the Disney one that you saw? And of course, with this, it can be any fairy tale at all. We're just using Cinderella tonight as a stimulus. So I'm reading one there. If you want to put your names on them, you're quite welcome. If not, no need. And we've got sisters moving into the glass slipper and sweeping, and the ball gown, and the prince. And then others over there, loss of parents, locked up, suffering, recovery. The prince who saves her, uniqueness and redemption. So it's interesting already. Everything is data. Number one, what people remember. Number two, some people remember a variety of different emotions, and others, it may be similar themes throughout the story. And there'll be bits of the story you might be looking at these different stickies and thinking, oh gosh, yes, I forgot about that bit. So if this was working with a team or a group, I may invite people to give their sort of timeline of the story. For the purpose of this session, because we've got a lot to cover and there's quite a few of us, we're going to leave it like that. So one thing, if you do not know the story of Cinderella at all, please take yourself off mute and shout, I don't. So at least we can together share the story so that everyone's on the same page. I'm really pleased about that. So everyone knows the story. Yay! Okay, so where we're going next, I'll just share a little bit about myself. So I am a coach, I'm a mentor, I'm a team coach and a supervisor, and also an Agile certified coach. But more than all of that, I absolutely love creating. So during lockdown, one of my projects was with over almost 50 professionals from around the globe, to bring together stories and reflections, tools and techniques. And this is when I, over the last couple of years, found myself not only reflecting more, consciously reflecting, getting more into the habit of reflecting, trying different very academic approaches and totally emergent approaches, writing, colouring. So I invite you tonight to go out your comfort zone. Try something you've not done with reflection. And before we move on, just as a check-in, anyone get any thoughts right now at this point as people have shared their stories, their remembering about Cinderella? Take yourself off mute and share what you feel you wish to.
So it feels like we're co-creating something here.
Say more.
Like you're the speaker and yet everyone is contributing kind of all at the same time in real time. There's something quite powerful about that.
I love that. And it's also interesting because we will have collective reflections. We'll also have personal reflections that we may share and may choose not to share. And we will walk through the story together, and then we'll see how we were at the start, how we were at the end. And you know what I thought? At the end, if you wish, you can also make an intention for the world, an intention in terms of this work together, this session, but also of ways we can draw on stories. And if anyone wishes, you can even make a commitment in terms of you maybe in the next week or two using stories in your sessions. Thank you. Anyone else like to share? So where we are now, Siberian elder shared, if you don't know the trees, you can get lost in the forest. If you don't know the stories, you can get lost in life. We live and talk and share through stories and metaphors and symbolism. It's a massive part of coaching, mentoring, and supervision. And so this is why using things creatively really appeals to me. I find that it goes deeper and wider. And as someone just shared, it brings people together. And also that sort of challenge element, it enables people to raise things that they experience or see or feel or notice as different as well, which of course is also important. So stories can help us through the forest of life. And so the first thing we're going to do is have a think of some of the themes that are in Cinderella. And we're going to a breakout for this for around 10 minutes. Quite a lot of this work, semi-structured in terms of I chose the actual fairy tale this time. However, total emergence in where we may end up together. Okay, so a theme, for example, just to share one theme, is a theme around bereavement. In some of the stories, it's quite a big piece. Cinderella lost her mother and her father remarries. Not all the stories give exactly the same actual storyline, storyboard. However, one theme is bereavement as an example. I'm not going to say any more. We're going to go to breakouts for 10 minutes. And here's what I want you to do. There'll be 5 breakouts, and basically we'll let you know once you're in the breakout. I'll jump in and I'll tell you which board for you to write on. So this group 1 breakout, there's group 2, there's group 3, and there's group 4. Basically grab the stickies to capture what you're sharing. And the inquiry is, what themes come up? What am I noticing cognitively in our minds, emotionally, and even somatically in my body? What are you noticing for the group in the breakout in your body, as we chat a little bit about where that theme played out in the story, cognitively, emotionally, and somatically. And then when you've looked at that theme a little bit, think of the other themes as well. Everyone clear? Okay, so it's breakout time. See you in 10 minutes. Hello, welcome back. So we'll go quickly through each group, see what themes you came up, see your reactions. You may want to share extremes of reactions, some you know, a happy one, maybe a not so. And so the first group was Antonio and his people. Who would like to share from that group?
So I love this. This is a fun exercise, and we pretty much went the whole range of you know, the themes and the feelings, and from optimism to, you know, despair almost. We didn't use despair as a word, but the grief, the power dynamic that was there, and that life can be unfair, but at the same time there's resilience, there's optimism, there's hope. There's high values that the young lady had, Cinderella, and there's also some cynicism because of the success was because of magic in part of the story, but also in part for resilience. So it's really interesting, the journey we took together.
Fabulous. There's so many things we can blend into this. One thing we can do with, if anyone's German here, please get off mic and pronounce this better than I do. One thing we can do with Gestalt is I am Cinderella, and talk from that place to really connect with it. You can also, with clients, do things like empty chair, looking at it from the perspective of the bird that was singing, or from the rat on the floor who turns into, you know, one of the guys who is there with the carriage looking at Cinderella. So there's so many different things we can blend into even just the looking at themes. So the next group, it was, I had down Carlos and co. Anyone from that group like to share?
It's Julia here.
Hi.
And Carlos began our conversation by saying he didn't really resonate with the story. It's not something that he'd particularly engaged with, which was really interesting. You know, the very diverse reactions that we had in the group. I think that would be our prominent theme, that some of us were engaging on a very superficial, cosmetic level, others going deep into the sort of psychological depths, and all finding something very different in the story. Yeah, I think that would be my summary.
I love that. And isn't that the case when we work with groups and teams? Sometimes people get so into it and it goes very deep, and there may be one or two who the next session where something entirely different happens, that's more for them. So I think it also talks to use a range of approaches, tools, techniques, models, ideas. Thank you. And it may just be this story. There may be another one I love is the Emperor's New Clothes, where the Emperor in the end goes through the streets with actually nothing on, and everyone's going, oh wow, amazing, we love your new clothes. That can happen in the workplace, everyone agreeing with a leader. Tell you what, we'll go to group 4, which is Becky and the people with Becky, and then just in case group 3 aren't sure who was in it, we'll know by the end. Group 4 with Becky, anyone wish to share from there?
I'm happy to speak if nobody else wishes to.
Fabulous.
So we had a long list of sort of keywords that we were taking from it. So resilience and forgiveness, hope and optimism, and then also hope and fear, the flip side. The disruption to the flow and the sort of leaving the comfort zone. And the sort of the roles, the official roles and the unofficial roles, the status of being daughter and maid. Love, courage, humility, empowerment, exploitation, inclusion and exclusion, and equity as well. All of the things that sort of came to our minds.
Fabulous, thank you. I do find that fairy tales especially are really useful as a stimulus for equity, diversity, inclusion and belonging. You know, and also so many things, you know, she's looking for the prince. Well, she wasn't looking for him, he found her, you know, and will there be a happy ever after now? Because I've been saved, that type of thing. You can also use these in a way that, and now we've looked at the themes. Which themes are you playing out as a team right now? What does the system need you to play out to serve your stakeholders? So from short conversations and discovery, it can go even deeper. And the other thing that I find this is extremely useful for, whether it's one-on-one or in groups, for the restorative leg of supervision. And even just one theme in an hour-and-a-half session can be a fabulous reflective discovery. Thank you. And then the fifth group was Andrew and the people that Andrew was with.
So we had a very good conversation as well. You can read the comments there. Optimism, and many of them we mentioned already. Authenticity, redemption, forgiveness. Also a comment of not connecting to the story, connecting to the process. Maybe would have been benefited from as a reminder of the story itself up front. But I think it was also great for, as a group, we briefly also talked about our emotional somatic response to the story and to what we were doing, and mentioned words around about you know, how does one deal with issues like loss? How are you feeling about that right now? And so I can't quite find my notes here what we were saying, but it was a very good short conversation, put it that way.
Fabulous, thank you. And it is
Thanks,
amazing how deep these can go, because we never know where someone else in a group or a team is at. One-on-one, we tend to, unless it's the first session, know the other person a little bit more. And then, you know, in terms of psychodynamics, it's amazing, consciously or subconsciously, how early experiences can pop into this type of work. Now, there was one group we missed. Is anyone from the group who hasn't spoken wanting to share? And if not, we'll move on.
I'll just share a couple of things. I think they might be different from some of the things that have been said. And one is that we had a bit of a conversation about rescue and agency and the relationship between those two and how we felt about them. And the other thing we were thinking about just generally was shift and small steps versus large steps, and who knows the whole story when.
Yeah. And there's a piece we look at the end in terms of rewriting the ending. That can be a really powerful tool. Especially, I'm thinking here, unusually in agile coaching with a team who, gosh, it's frenetic and we're doing the meetings, etc. And the ending just needed rewriting because so many things change. Yes, they're working iteratively, but the amount of things that change, it was reflection that Eric DeHaan talks about, looking into the future and in terms of what is needed for the team to work at their optimum. So many different things can come out. Thank you for sharing. So where we are now, this slide is there for you. We won't go into too much depth here. Remembering that people will have heard different stories. Here are just a few of the different ones that are out there. The majority of people that I've worked with have tended to know the Brothers Grimm story, the one where the mother has died, the father gets remarried. And it's amazing, sometimes it's a big focus on certain element in some of the stories compared to others. Sharing the story that collectively you choose to use pre-session can be useful. there's even video clips on YouTube, and especially from, cultural and other elements to bring everyone together. And also the sharing of the differences in the different stories is obviously really important as well. So as well as the themes in the story, another thing that is interesting is to look at the characters. So I invite you now we're going to close this, we're moving to symbolism after characters, is to either just reflect. I'm going to give you about 3-4 minutes, scribble, draw, use clay if you brought some, even blue tack, although that's plastic, so I don't try and encourage people to bring that to the session so much. Or if you want to close off camera and just close your eyes, do what you need to do around this. And which character in the story resonates with you the most? And of course, if no characters in the story resonate with you, then of course that's an inquiry as well. If you want to think of someone you're working with right now, so maybe it's someone you're supervising or a coachee, who do they remind you of from the different actors, actresses, players in the story? So we're just here trying to encourage you to connect with characters. Give you a few minutes. And welcome back. So in terms of reflecting on the characters that you're playing out, or that your coaches or mentees or supervisees are playing out, anyone like to share?
Yes, Claire, me.
Thank you. Lovely to see Sylviane.
So in fact, I was in the group with this beautiful lady from Nigeria who is the leader, and we find ourselves, sorry, I forgot your name, excuse me, but we find ourselves in different roles, in fact, including the pumpkin, because we are coaches, so we find ourselves, she was herself in the prince, me both in Cinderella, both in the godmother, because we are coaches and we are witnessing transformation, but in the light way, biddy, 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 so quite light. And finally the pumpkin as well. And then I was challenging her on the color of her dress that was between orange and red with sparkling stuff, so it was, thank you so much.
Thank you. And was there anything that you, I know it's only short, managed to talk about in terms of the process when you did it on your own and then you shared together?
It's multiplication of roles, in fact. Mm-hmm. That is, at the beginning, you find yourself in the row, and all of a sudden, you get creative, and you tell yourself, if I was this, and if I was that, this one, and if I was there, and it works. And it works. Yeah. And it's a question of reframing. In fact, the story is seen from other eyes. This is what we do, coaches. We reframe all the time. So you see, and in neuroscience, remember, Claire, that you can take the same story and put yourself in the shoes, in the pose of the mouse, and then yourself of Cinderella, etc., and move. The perspective are completely different, and we get into systemics. You see, so it was progressive, opening up progressively. Beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else like to share?
I was with James and Christina, I think, in our group, and so similar. I think we talked about, like, Christina resonate with some. You're in different roles at different times. The one I was sharing was around from a client perspective specifically, and whilst I hate the phrase "ugly sister" because it's it's all about beauty, etc. But the sense of around feedback. We'll just go on to the topic of feedback, and are they aware that they are the baddies in the story? Are they aware of the negative aspects, because clearly they've been fed some very a particular storyline from, I think it was the stepmother, I guess, but around that they are the most beautiful, they're the most perfect, etc. So but in real life, when you have clients who have a little bit of the world is difficult, it's challenging, but you start seeing themes around that there might be a little bit of truth in the fact that there is some underperformance. So who's giving them the feedback? What is their feedback loop? Is it just echo chambers? Are they just only going to the same places that reinstates their particular view of the world? And what is your role as a coach to try and, encourage them to seek a different perspective? Is it up to you to be the person that gives them the feedback? Probably not, but is it you to help them, seek a wider perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. It brings in beliefs a lot as well. Thank you, Iman. Anyone else like to share?
Go on, I'll have a go.
Thank you, Mary.
I got volunteered to have a go, to be fair, when there were 3 seconds left on the clock and no time for debate. I personally go with Baron Hardup. And for me and my clients, find ourselves in a difficult situation, think we're doing the best we possibly can, but don't really know how to get out of it. So, let's just stay quiet for a comfortable life. Type thing. So I very much do that. And we all had different elements of that. And we thought, well, if we're the coach, then we're this. And if we're the coachee, well, then it might be that. And we said it's all very contextual. So on any, if we did the same exercise next week, we might all immediately come up with a different one, because it could be circumstances at the time and what's top of mind. And actually, we could probably relate ourselves to any of the characters.
Fabulous. Thank you. Anyone else? Carl.
I'll share.
Thank you.
Yes, we had an interesting realization after we all spoke, in that we all chose peripheral characters. One was the mother of the prince, another was the mouse or the mice, and then I misunderstood the instruction. And I made my own story. I just was myself, and I found there were similar themes to Cinderella's story, and we just tied all those themes, and we were just noticing how none of us chose the central characters in the story, and we had very, though it was short, but very rich conversation.
Thank you. I love that. So we're going somewhere a little bit different now. I invite you to draw or sketch the kitchen that, for me, sort of feels down in the basement of wherever they were living. So I'll give you just 2 minutes to draw out the kitchen. Remember, with this type of stuff, nobody gets it wrong. There's no right and wrong. Ditch all that I'm not an artist. Who cares what your artwork today is like? And now you've drawn that, be aware what you're surprised at in terms of what's on that sketch. Be aware of anything that, of course, that was going on it. Be aware of anything that really got you thinking. Maybe there was a cat Mary in that kitchen as well. Be aware what came up for you as you were doing that sketch. And so Cinderella's there in the kitchen, doing all the work, and the others are going to this ball that everyone's excited about soon. And she knows that there's an invitation, but she's not allowed to go. And she's there down in the old clothes and the dirt. And just think of a time, and it can be something now. It doesn't have to be, really deep, but choose something real. Or think of a time in your past when you felt that way somehow. I suppose what comes up for me about that is like, it's all happening for them. Or there's also, I don't want to lead, of course. So I'm going to put you in the same breakout room and just discuss what you drew, why you drew it, what stands out, what you drew that you forgot about, and what's it like being in that place. Okay? And see if you can connect with that experience that you've had of whatever comes up, being in that place, and have a think about in terms of resilience. What options have you got? What might you do to get through this? Or in the past, what you did do, what worked, who or what supported you? So I'll choose the same groups and we'll stay in the breakouts for around the same time. Okay, see you shortly. So anyone like to share what you discovered in your breakouts this time? Thank you, Nigel.
Hi, in our group of three, we really what was emerging were quite different kitchens, and it was really interesting how, in a short space of time, with you on this in this session, we've really diverged and our uniquenesses are coming out. So, for example, out of three, two the kitchens, it was really Cinderella. There wasn't that much there. Maybe a focus on a fireplace. Then for the third person, it was a much busier kitchen with a story playing out, with the stepsisters on a nice dining table, demanding food, and this sort of Cinderella toiling away, perhaps behind the island, sort of separation. And then things emerging, like a cat emerged for one of us, just and a sense of there's no window for one of us as well, the sense of there's no escape. So you certainly latched onto something here, this exercise, in terms of you'd almost be going to therapy now. I see us moving. I see how we could lead that way.
So if it was a therapeutic,
I think it felt really good in the conversation. I don't know. I feel really bad speaking for Julia, for example, and I don't know whether Julia wants to say anything. I think it was a really warm conversation. I think it almost like a team building. You could imagine as a team building, a very unusual way of connecting. Yeah.
And I didn't use this one, but a similar one. And what do we as a team need in this kitchen during this time when we need more resilience? Just an example as and someone might say X. Why X? What's that about? What will that bring to you? What will that bring to us at team level? So many places we can go. Thank you, Nigel. Anyone else?
Hi, I very much agree with Nigel there, and I think I mentioned to our group also, Andrew and Becky were with me, that it felt it's an exercise that you almost go into like a therapy session when you go so deep into your pain and hurt of your past. And I even was asking, how do you deal with it? How careful, I think Andrew mentioned that how careful you have to be with this exercise, that you're not overstepping and not going too deep into something that probably it will be very hard to pull them back again to where they are now. That's one point. And the other one, when you ask those questions, what do you need? Everybody's so different. You almost will experience that yourself as a coach first, but you have to be very careful and cautious how you're going to express that back, or how you're going to guide them, or what questions you're going to ask for them to feel more on the positive side, as opposed to going backwards and experience that feeling again. So that was my observation. I don't know if guys want to add to it more.
And just before anyone else adds, I see this as, and in terms of that reflection, what are you experiencing right now? So that's blending in Gestalt again, and it's keeping them in the here and now, because we can't ignore what's gone in the past, but what are you noticing now? And you can go obviously somatic there. Anyone else? Thank you, Anna. Anyone from that group or another one?
I sort of feel it's almost a metaphorical way of mapping your system. So, and then you've got something out on the page, which I think is why Nigel was saying it felt like a warm, because you can sort of respond quite quickly with what you've got put out in front of you on the virtual page or on the actual page. So it felt similar to sort of doing systemic work but from a metaphorical viewpoint, if that makes any sense at all.
It does. And you can actually use things, you know, and I've got a stone here, place them physically in the room around the bits and then go near them if you've got a big space, or on the table, but also on Miro. You can bring any image into there and do it that way. And, you know, the broom, and what does that, you know, someone's trying to sweep up the mess. And gosh, I'm thinking of one hospital in one country where I worked, and the issue was people trying, unfortunately, to cover up mistakes, as opposed to together, let's work out the way we can try and ensure it never happens again in future. Gosh, that was just the broom coming into my mind there. Thank you, Julia. Thank you. So, anyone else before we move on? Can I have you for another 3 hours? So where we are next, we've got there some of the things we've looked at, you know, lessons in survival, abuse, obviously, you know, I'd see that as therapy, and it may need that conversation around this isn't in the scope of our work, and a referral may need to be made. And then the things of the resilience of, you know, who or what can support you right now. She's got in the story the birds and the mice and so forth. So many things we can look into there. And then the other thing that we can do, and you brought it in part, so we may not need a great deal of time on this, is to look at symbolism. So using the story as a sort of grounding place. For example, you know, I'm not an English literature teacher, my sister is, and things like the dress, the gown, to do with whether it's affluence or identity and so forth, and then the pumpkin in terms of transition. It transitioned to something else, and then also transitioned her, moved her to the ball. The rats may be lower class, you know, and yet supportive there for her when they moved on. So many different things in symbolism can be drawn upon, and then we can go to the situation of the person we're coaching or mentoring, or the team, or who we're supervising, in terms of what is around you right now. What ways symbolically are you using those things? What other ways may they be able to support you? So some really interesting conversations can come around that. And absolutely, you know, if anyone uses this systemic focus, so much is there, even in terms of energy levels, is a fabulous thing. You know, the metaphor, what's the temperature like in the kitchen? What a great question to teams. And if you are in the kitchen, what's the temperature right now, like right now, when someone asks a sort of, you know, fierce courage, brave question to the team? So we looked at themes before, many other things we can play with these themes and the different ways of, you know, even just the abuse of power. It comes into coaching, mentoring conversations. And where I'm going to invite you to go now is to write down, and if this story was happening in our present day, what are you curious about? And I'm going to give you 3 minutes to write down anything you're curious about. If this story was happening in our present day. You can also think of a real case for this question as well, if you wish.
I'll be brave again.
The only thing that came to my mind was it's like a case of modern day slavery. And the question that came to my mind is, why does nobody intervene? It can't be that people haven't noticed.
And Mary, what we can do with that is also blend in, for example, transactional analysis. So we can use that as a frame and what's going on right now. Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else?
I also, first thing I wrote down was things don't change really, brackets slavery. And yet at the same time, I think it's the challenge here also fits with what we were discussing in our small group of remaining or maintaining a sense of optimism and the challenge of that, especially when times are tough. And yet at the same time, I've called it grounded dreaming. Now, how do you at the same time maintain a degree of realism, but at the same time also a degree of dreaming and wishing for something different? You know, wanting to change, have a change, yet at the same time being realistic. That's probably not going to come from outside.
Yeah. And the work of Viktor Frankl comes to mind there.
Indeed.
And Covey, you know, circle of influence and what can we impact? Yeah. Anyone else?
I was thinking of the ball as a formal ritual that actually brought the community together, so it created inclusion. And whether that's something that's lacking, we don't have that many ways of coming together as a community. And obviously this is a paternalistic one because it's provided by the king or the prince, but it did allow, you know, everybody was invited, including Cinderella. So that was what occurred to me as another absence, perhaps.
Yeah. And some of the stories say she had a ticket, but they didn't share it with her. Other stories say she knew about the ticket and had to stay at home anyway. So those two are really interesting as well, aren't they? So thank you, Julia, for moving us on as well with the story. So then it's the night of the ball and the sisters go and the mother, and she just thinks she's there for the night, and the fairy godmother comes, and obviously this is a real nutshell. The fairy godmother comes, you shall go to the ball, and the magic happens, and she goes there in the carriage, meets the prince, they dance together, fall in love. We may have reactions about that as well. And then 12 o'clock, ding, she has to run to get home, loses her shoe, and then he's looking all over for cinders to find out. Goes to their house, and of course, the shoe. Well, why would she need to try it on? Because the sisters and stepmother don't think she was at the house and at the ball that night. She was downstairs at the house. And then she catches his eye from a distance down the stairs. Of course, the shoe fits, and they get married. And so, where I invite you to go now is to have a think about, and it's in line as well with what Julia said, it's to have a think about a different ending for this story. To have a think about either a different ending or what happens after the marriage. And just as one idea, with teams, what needs to happen for you, for example, to work or to communicate more effectively together? What needs to happen for you to listen to the needs of the wider system? So these can be used as a stimulus. If you want to forget work and just play and come up with a story, I'm going to put you in a breakout and you can just have a think, you know, where does this story need to go for an organization or a team you're aware of? Or where does this story need to go in terms of you as a practitioner in your career and what's next? One story, working with NGO, different people in an NGO. It was a group, not a team, but one of them said, and the prince she marries is so rich that she can actually freely do as much charity work as she wishes. And so that was the happy ending. Of course, the ending doesn't necessarily, it can stay as it is sometimes. During COVID, for example, we cannot have a magic wand and fix everything for people that we're working with. So I invite you, again, this is a quick one, just 4 minutes, to connect with an ending past the ball and be aware here, what does the chosen ending together say about you? And that might be a personal reflection. Say about you right now, today. So I'm putting you in the same breakouts just for about 4 minutes, then we'll wrap up together. Is the task clear? Cool. See you shortly. So I was with Dunnan. I hope I've said your name right, Dunnan.
Yes. Dudu.
Dudu. I like that. And she came up with something curious and interesting. Over to you.
Okay, so I'll just share very quickly. For me, it was just about my value add for the client in terms of behaviors. What specifically am I doing to add value as one of the client supporters in terms of what you see and what you hear, not just this abstract adding value, but what exactly I would be doing in terms of behaviors to add value to my client in his space or her space. And when you talked about boundaries, when you talked about 12 o'clock, as in midnight when the clock went, I was thinking again of all the boundaries that we always set. Oh, I won't do this, I won't do that. How does that affect what I am doing for the client? All these boundaries that coaches like to put in place.
And it's interesting, you know, I often think of 3 areas of, you know, senior leadership: the people, the process, the product or service, of course, the sector, and then the pioneering element. And the irony between more boundaries, less creativity and innovation.
Absolutely.
So sometimes working on this type of, and what ending do we need? Whether that is used in a concrete way, you know, and created into a real plan, or that's the stimulus to get the brains working, to go to the work and think generatively, come on now, what do we need to do to close this appropriately, for example? So thank you, Dunnan. And interesting as well, because boundaries, they stuck out for you, and for other people it may have been something very different, like leaving the silver shoe behind. So there's all sorts of things. Who was the team left behind? There's another way of using things metaphorically. Who or what? Anyone else?
If I can jump, I would love to do it, because it was very funny. And Sylvian bring that diapers. We will need diapers because there will be babies. But then we thought, okay, but we need also toys, and disconnecting with teams and organizations for bringing more sense of playfulness, of lightness, and more focus in the things that we have to celebrate, and not only in the difficulties. So I wanted to share this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm thinking in terms of supervision as well, the challenge, but also the support. Anna.
After listening to first speaker, what is it? Dudun, is it? Am I pronouncing right? Yeah, I very much agree to what you're saying. In the meantime, somebody mentioned forgiveness, and that came up in our group as well. I believe that if you go about your things the same way as always, being in generations and generations, you're in that cycle indefinitely until something happens, until somebody breaks the cycle. So to me, there is an opportunity. Cinderella is getting married. Everything is perfect, but yet she is forgiving her stepsisters because they're not actually bad. they have their own issues with their mother and among themselves, and they need their own stories. And I think if Cinderella helps them, so she breaks the cycle of that tension between the good and bad and evil or whatever. But again, I'm speaking metaphorically, I'm speaking within this story, but it's a huge thing for somebody to forgive somebody else who hurt you deeply, because they might have hurt you and that particular moment, they thought about it a little bit, they've forgotten a long time. But a year later, 5 years later, 10 years later, you still reliving that fear, that hurt. So if Cinderella took a different turn, shut them down, it's always a fear. It never will stay that way. It comes back. So I believe in happy stories, I guess. It's another rosy road, but she can do a lot of good by combining the two worlds and represent two worlds and bring them together with kindness and forgiveness. That's what I will be thinking of in my coaching session anyway, and for myself personally. So
fabulous. Thank you. And you brought in something else there. You can also, with this, explore the backstories. What are the backstories of the sisters or the stepmother? What's really interesting in that? It can help people think about beliefs, things we make up as adults all the time. So that's, and there's humour there, but there's also some quite serious things there as well, isn't there? Thank you. So just to close off here, Can
I jump in there, Claire?
Yeah, do.
Thank you.
Otherwise, I'll go on all night, Becky.
Thank you. That sort of brings us to the end of the session. But before we head off into the networking, I'd just like to ask you, Claire, please, just to share a 30-second reflection of what's stuck in your mind from the dialogue today. And whilst Claire's delivering that, if anybody else wants to jump in, extend that to all of you, just to pop it in the chat. Just a couple of words about, what your takeaway is from today's session. Over to you, Claire.
So what I loved about this session is people opening up. There was clearly reflection going on, and also polarism in terms of connecting with the story or not. So there's a lot of learning there for all of us in terms of the ways we can use fairy tales and other stories, fables, etc., with our clients in coaching, supervision, and mentoring. It's also a fabulous tool for self-reflection as well. Who am I playing out right now?
Wonderful, thank you. Some great insights and wonderful discussion. On behalf of EMCC Global, I would like to thank you for leading such a rich and creative conversation.